All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're finally talking about the Navbar, which is one of the most popular and commonly used components. I already mentioned this earlier in the section that some people I know use Bootstrap almost exclusively for the Navbars and for the grid system. They might use other components, but the real driver for why they use Bootstrap are the two things I mentioned. So let's see what they look like. We've been staring at this one for a long time, this Navbar. These are usually at the top of the page, but I'll show you. You can put them at the bottom, but this is where they usually go. They contain links, almost always, a little header or a brand, whether it's an icon or an image, that's often there. Then sometimes we can have drop downs, we can have forms, buttons, and most importantly, we can make them responsive. Take a look at this Navbar here. As I shrink it down, we get this nice hamburger icon, toggler to open and close the drawer. Instead of having all this information compacted into a squished little bar, we get it with that toggler icon and we can open it. So there's a lot of things we can do. We can add icons, we can add forms, we can move things around, we can center things, move things to the right and the left. We can even put input groups in the navbars, obviously text, different color schemes. We can do custom colors, like this purple one is not built into Bootstrap. Even if it's made with Bootstrap, we can just specify background color purple. And there's plenty of other things we can do. We'll talk about this later, but we can fix them to the top or the bottom. We can do what's called a sticky top navbar. There's a lot of things we can do. But first, I have to warn you, and you can probably see some of this, the markup gets a little bit nasty. And this is one of the main criticisms of Bootstrap and its navbars. The markup, it becomes a mess. Now, it makes sense. There's logic to it. It's not just random. But compared to a lot of the other components, the navbar requires a lot of markup, a lot of classes, as you can see. So I just want to prepare you for that. This is one of the components where personally, I always forget things as well. I can remember most of the components off the top of my head, the class names. But whenever I'm making a navbar, which you're really only doing once per website that you're working on, I just open up the docs and copy and paste what I need, tweak things, move them around. No shame in that, because there's a lot to remember here. And pretty much anything that you would want is on these docs in the first place. So let's start not with this complex one that they have at the top. This is sort of showing you everything you can do at once. Let's start with a super simple one that looks like this. It just has what's called a brand in the navbar. Okay, so I'm gonna move this over. As always, I have a file over here, Navbars, it's empty, has Bootstrap. So if we just want the most basic navbar ever, we can create a nav. You could also do this as a div. You could do this as many different elements if you wanted to. You could make it an article. It just doesn't semantically make sense. But most of the time you'll see on the docs that they use a nav class, which functionally is exactly the same as a div. It just has a different name that makes more sense. So I'm going to give it class of navbar. And then we specify a color like navbar-light. And this color is not actually the background color. This is the color of the text. And it's kind of confusing. So I'm going to do bg-light as well. And I'll come right back to this. I'm going to make an anchor tag with the class of navbar brand. So navbar brand is, the brand of your website, your company. This is where you would put your logo usually, or at least the name of your website. And we'll just say navbar, basically just copy what they have and save. And this is what we get. So it's on the left. And the first thing I'll point out is that if we remove navbar light and save, now we just end up with like a default link style up here. So navbar light is referring to the text. And we can also do navbar dark. It just makes really hard to see white text, but it is white there. So unlike text light or text dark, this is actually opposite. So if you're making a light navbar, you want dark text. So you say navbar light with background light. So let me just duplicate this and show you. We can do navbar dark with BG dark. And there we go. So everything will be white text on a dark background. If you do navbar light, it will be dark text on a light background. Okay, so if we go back to our brand, we can do things like this, where you can also include a heading. If you don't want it to be a link, right now this is a link. It's not taking me anywhere, but often you'll have this take you to a home page. But you can also make this a heading. You could give it something like a class of H1, make it a little bit larger, more exciting. I'll just copy that one. Now you could also just give the class of h1 to your anchor tag and turn it into an h1. So it's not a full-sized h1, by the way, but at least it's a little bolded. Moving along, they talk about how you can add an image. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're going to do this on our project. We'll add a little logo there, but we could easily add an icon or something. If I just quickly install Font Awesome and just paste it in from here from the website, you don't need to do this. This is not that important. But if I go find some icon I like for my website, let's say that I like this, page lines, whatever that is. Maybe it's a company. If I want to include, actually, let's do tooth. I like tooth. So I can just come down here and just add an icon, make some space, and give it a class of, this is the Font Awesome syntax, and save. And we now have that tooth icon. I could change the color. I could give it a little padding or margin. Let's say margin left 3, or excuse me, right. I want margin right. That's too much. How about 2? There we go. Now we have an icon. So that's just a simple example. Other things that we can do, we don't need any more Font Awesome, is start to add links in our navbar. Okay, so now here's where things get a little bit more complicated. This is if you want to add in multiple links. Let's just take a look at this one on full screen, something like this, and you want it to be responsive and collapse. As you can see here, here's what we need to do. We add in the markup for our nav links, which are here, or as we expand, the links are here, but we also add in markup for a button that will be the toggler. And we have to add in a little bit of these data attributes. We haven't talked about any of this yet. As far as JavaScript, and I'll introduce it in just a moment, but we have to add in some extra markup that is currently hidden. We don't see it, but then once we shrink this down, it comes into play. Where are you? I lost it. There we go. I'm going to start with a simple one. I'm just going to copy one of these navs to start. I'll add an h1 or something to space it out. Let's say collapse nav and save. Okay, so we have our navbar, blah, blah, blah. We have our brand. And then after this, we need to add a button. And this button will have a class of navbar-toggler, and that's important. And then there's this attribute data toggle. And this is basically telling, it's a hook for Bootstrap to know, okay, this is the thing that's supposed to toggle something. And we set it to collapse. And then we need to give it a target. So what is it supposed to collapse when it's clicked? And this is all Bootstrap magic behind the scenes. So data target equals, and we'll give it some ID. Now this ID isn't set on something. I don't like when they use navbar nav. Let's just do something more distinct, like my nav. I'm not saying that's a great name, but at least it will make it clearer. We'll talk about accessibility later, but to save time, I'm going to leave all this ARIA stuff off. Then inside of that button, you could put whatever you want here, by the way. We could just do click and save it at that. I'll do that to start so we can see what happens. Then we come down and do a div with the class of collapse, the class of navbar collapse. And this is the thing we have to give our ID to. The ID that I set up right here, my nav. So I'm going to do that now. ID equals my nav. So whatever is in this div is going to collapse or disappear on a certain size. And we'll talk about how you can change that size. But it's what will be toggled by this button. Okay, so now in here, we just add our nav. And the only thing that's different compared to what we saw last time when we were just talking about regular navs, which was, 3 videos ago? We add the class navbar-nav instead of just nav. So I'm going to do a UL. I'm going to do navbar-nav. Inside, we're going to have an li with nav item. And then we'll have an anchor tag with class of nav link. And let's just set them all to be nothing. And this one will be, I don't know, about. Let's do home and then duplicate these, at least 3 of them. We'll do about, and let's make this first one active, and sure, make this one disabled so you can just see the difference. Okay, so this should look familiar. This is just a nav, except navbar-nav instead of nav. Now if I save and we take a look, here's what we get. So we have this button here, and it's working as a toggler. Remember, I just made it say click just to show you that you can put whatever you want there. You can put an icon of your own choice. And currently, it's always stuck in this state. It's always collapsed, and you have to click to reveal. So we can make it responsive. What I'm going to do, though, I'm going to say always collapsed as our brand. And then I'm going to duplicate our navbar so that we have another one that will expand at a certain size. But first, I'm going to fix this. So instead of just the word click, we do a span. And if you take a look, it's in the docs. The span needs to have the class of navbar-toggler-icon. So this is how we get that standard icon, what people call the hamburger. Navbar, toggler, icon. Save, and you don't put anything inside of it. And now we have it. There we go. Okay, so to review this, the important components, you need to tell Bootstrap, all right, this is a thing that is going to control the collapse. Data toggle equals collapse. Then we tell it, this is what you're supposed to collapse when I click you, which is something with the ID of my nav. So then we need to give this entire nav the ID of my nav so that it collapses. We give it the class of collapse, navbar collapse. Like I said, I forget a lot of this. Just make sure you can find it on the docs. Okay, so next, let's talk about how would you make this expand at a different size? And here you go. Scroll down just a little bit further. Navbar-expand-LG. So that's one option. Let's say I want this to expand. I'm going to duplicate my entire navbar. And I want this one to expand at small. To do that, I just come up to my navbar and I say navbar-expand. What size do I want it to expand at? Small. Now you can see that it's expanded, and once we hit extra small, it's collapsed. Oh, okay, well this is annoying. I have them all using the same ID, so they're all going to open at the same time. So I could fix that, I guess. Let's do myNav2 and change this to be myNav2. Now when I click this one, they're separate. Okay, so as I hit the small breakpoint, it expands. And I'll just do one more to show you. I won't do every single breakpoint and waste your time. But let's change things up a little bit. Let's do navbar dark and background dark. Let's say this one is expand at large. And then we need to do navbar-expand-LG. And also give it a different ID. Let's do myNav3. Okay, so now this one, like all of them, they're collapsed at extra small. It works. As I hit small, this one expanded. I hit medium, nothing changes. And I hit large, this one expands. And it stays expanded the entire time now until I go back to medium. Okay, so I'll leave off there. There's a lot to navbars. We're not done. I'm going to talk about forms, talk about positioning of the navbars, but just as far as introing the basics, getting them to collapse and expand at different sizes, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you at least can copy and paste, tweak things. We talked about background colors. So yeah, next up we'll talk about changing the appearance more, adding in a form, moving things around. See you then.